Appalachia, curator Krenisha Whiteside-McGee. So this is in partnership with a lot of units in the department. We want to take the Black American Studies, the Langston Center, the Tennessee Arts Commission, the Bravissima Women Sponsoring the Arts, the East Tennessee Foundation, the Multicultural Center. We have the Umoja as partners, the RTVF, the Film Studies Program, and the Birdsea Bach Written Word Initiative. We would not have been able to organize such an amazing event without all these partners, and of course, Krenisha doing the curatorial project, You All Don't Hear Me, is very special. We would like to request your faculty, your professor, Dr. Jesse Graves, to introduce our special speaker for today.
Thank you, Carlotta, and thank you all for being here for our special session today, and to help us welcome Nikki Giovanni to ETSU.
I can't believe this.
She's,
Oh,
somebody's calling to tell her to be here.
it's my son.
now.
Hey, Tom.
Hey.
Can I call you back?
Sorry.
I'm making a film right now.
Oh, sure. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, I'll call you back. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
This is how
That
we're
phone
always
hasn't
doing
rung all day. I've been trying to reach my secretary all morning. My phone wouldn't ring. That was my son. And so, you know, you have to take your
You gotta take
son.
that one. That's
Yeah, I'm
right.
sorry. And then my cousin fell. She lives in California, and, you know, it's a mess there. And she fell and broke her shoulder, which is a terrible thing to break. And, of course, as I was doing this speech yesterday, Bo, her husband's name Bo called and the phone rang, and it was Bo, and I had to take because I knew there was a reason. And he said, I've got bad news. And I thought, oh, my God, you know, Pat died, or, you know, something really terrible. A broken shoulder is really terrible, but at least she's alive, and he has found someone to do the house and everything. Hell, my house is so dusty, you wouldn't believe. I mean, my dust is up to here because I haven't had time to be bothered. But you were introducing me.
I don't know what more I could say to introduce you, except, don't forget, tonight at 6 p.m., Professor Giovanni will be with us to read poetry, to sign copies of her books as part of the Black American Writers Series at 6 p.m. in Brown Hall Auditorium. So I hope to see all of you there. And also, thanks to Carlotta for giving us all of it truly does take a village to make a visit like this happen. And you heard all the names of all the sponsors. A lot of people have to work together. And I'm really glad that we were able to get some students here to have a first-hand experience with the national treasure, Nikki Giovanni. She's a legend in the worlds of poetry, literary studies, American culture at large. With her very recent retirement from a distinguished career as a professor of English at Virginia Tech University, congratulations.
Thank you.
She celebrates another milestone in one of the major literary careers of our time. I feel very fortunate we're able to host her now. Professor Giovanni is a Knoxville, Tennessee native and a central figure in the Black arts movement and Appalachian literature. She's the author of over 20 volumes of poetry, beginning in 1968 with Black Feeling, Black Talk. How about that for a classic from the Stax? And more than a dozen books for children. She is the recipient of more awards and recognitions than anyone can count, including 7 NAACP Image Awards and the very first Rosa Parks Women of Courage Award. And she's been presented with the keys to seemingly most of the cities in America. So she's welcome everywhere. She goes, all this to say, her words have touched the hearts of many people, and I'm honored to welcome her to ETS.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I do have to apologize, but I always take my son's calls. Because you never know what's going on. And I have a granddaughter, she's 16, and they live in New York, but she drives now. And I don't know what you know about New York, but it's a terrible place to drive. Yeah. And so I always worry that, maybe something has happened with Kai. And they all, they drive like this, they're going in, and there's another car, and they're like by inches.
Did she get the little bumpers
I usually
on the
just sit in and just go, okay, because I don't want to see it.
No.
And, if you're going to die, I guess if you're going to die, you want it, but I don't want to see it. I just don't want to
Is she going to get the bumpers on the car?
I don't know what she's going to.
Yeah.
I just know that what she would like for her birthday next year, because she'll be, well, Grandma Nick, I'll be 17. And you think you better be getting a job if you want a car. But I wouldn't give her a car, of course not.
So is it on me now, Carlotta? Is she in here? All right, I guess it's on me. So, yeah, like they said, thank y'all for being here. This is just going to be a nice, casual conversation with a legend. And if y'all have any questions, are we like saving those for the end? I don't mind like
I don't.
that. Okay, cool. All right. So,
We've made you nervous now.
I mean, a little bit. It's so
Oh, no.
quiet in
No,
here.
and I want to
but-
thank my sorority sister for being here with us and taking the time out. You know, I was a friend of, and you don't know, but I was a friend of Mrs. Parks. It was a lovely thing. I had met her, and we got along, and I get along with a lot of people. And then she had to, of course, you know, move to Detroit because her life was threatened and things like that. And I used to go up because Detroit was in terms of black arts, Detroit was a major city, and not to mention Motown being the music. And I would go up and I would get to see her, and she's I'm a coffee drinker, Miss Parks is a tea drinker. And we were sitting there one day, and there's nothing on earth dumber than asking somebody like Mrs. Parks, well, how did you feel about, you know, being arrested? Because, you know, what do you think she felt? And we were just sitting there like we're sitting here. And I said, you know, Miss Parks, when I think of your life, it's amazing that I can only think of one mistake that you made. And Mrs. Parks was very cool, just incredibly cool. You know, she never, and you've seen enough of her, she never, and she just looked at me for a minute, her face fell just a smidgen. And she said, well, what's that, baby? And I said, you went AKA. We're all deltas, I don't know.
that's part of the Delta segment data.
And the AKAs really get me for that one. But of course, they have a vice president of the United States now because Carlotta is Dr. Harris is an AKA. So we've given them something back.
Now, you've been at ETSU before.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I think if it's there, I've been.
Yeah. Does anything stand out about the city itself?
Well, I'm a Knoxvillian by birth, and of course we knew Johnson City. You know, you're going back and forth.
Yeah.
I don't have much remembrance. You know, I know that you have one of the great hotels, and I'm glad the Carnegie is one of the most beautiful hotels, really. And I think that that's very nice. And I was reading, you know, I know it had burned down, but then they rebuilt it. And I think that that's very good because it is important. And I don't know what we're bringing into Johnson City.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're doing. I know Bristol, of course, because everybody knows Bristol because you have the racetrack. So Eastern Tennessee is not only close to my heart, but incredibly, I think, important to the history. And if it hadn't been for Knoxville, as we know, because actually, if you look at Nashville, was about the money, and Memphis was about its neighbor was Mississippi. So you know that we couldn't have counted on Memphis if Memphis had gone with Mississippi and Nashville had not been what they were. Tennessee would have been occupied. And you know, Tennessee is the only state in the Union, I'm sure that you know, after the Civil War, that was not occupied, and that's because of the courage of Knoxville. Eastern Tennessee and Appalachia stayed with the Union, and that made all the difference. And I'm very proud to be a Knoxvillian for that we went with the Union. And obviously, as we're looking at the situation now, we're going to have to make some decisions about what we're going to do about bringing America back together. And a lot of that's going to depend upon the Appalachians and what we decide to do and how we decide to come together.
Has there been a moment in time where you felt like the Appalachia was getting to that point, or do you feel like we're making that progress now?
I think we've I hate to say it like this because it'll come out wrong, but I think the Appalachians are the best white people in America. I do. And every time America needs something done, they call on us, whether black or white. And of course, I grew up in Tennessee. I grew up in Cincinnati also. But when we got ready to go into space, so do we call John Glenn. And he's an Appalachian, if you recall. And of course, who did John Glenn depend upon? 7 black women. And John Glenn said, well, you know what, he called them the girls. He said, I'll get on the rocket, but what do the girls say? And he had computers. They were trying to say, well, it'll be all right. We know. He said, no,
Yeah.
What did the girl say?
Yeah.
And it's a black woman said to him, well, Mr. Glenn, if you go up, I'll bring you back. And I'm very proud to be a black woman because I knew that John knew that he could depend on that, and he went up and he came back, of course.
What was the name of that movie? Hidden Figures. Yeah. So we know how we refer to you or what we introduce you as, but what do you introduce yourself as?
Oh, I'm just Nikki.
Just Nikki.
I'm fine, and now more and more, because it's not embarrassing. My son doesn't know when to call or something, but I am a grandmother, and so again, just because there's not much family left, the Giovannis, there's Thomas, and then there's my granddaughter Kai, and that's it. The family has been reduced, I guess is the term, to there's 3 of us, and that's all we are. So we have to kind of hold together. And I only have one other girl cousin, the one, and I mentioned she fell and broke her shoulder. But we are a family of men. Yeah. And my mother's family, who are the Watsons, are all Georgians. And of course, Georgians are all gun people. So it's really, they are.
We know.
And so I grew up with gun people. So guns, I think guns are not a good idea, but I grew up with the men who had the guns.
Right.
And so you had that, but all that's left is Thomas, and I don't think he could step on a spider. No, he's a nice, I mean, he's a nice man, and I am very proud of him. He's a lawyer, though, so I get to tease him. Who are you stealing from today? Because that's what lawyers do all the time. Yeah, Mama, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I said, no, you ought to steal more.
Is your granddaughter going the same route as him with the legal, or is she taking more of the artistic?
I think that Thomas agrees with me that he's a good father. I think that she's going to do what she wants to do. It's not for us to interfere, you know. And it's just, Grandma Nick, this is when I said, don't tell me Grandma Nick anything. And I don't want to hear it because I don't care what you want. And it's not my job. If she wants a card, like I said, she should get a job. Because, you start to do that. I see these kids, and I'm not that famous, and I'm certainly not rich. But if you start to do everything, then pretty soon they don't have anything to do. And I think that's a bad idea, So she'll figure out what she wants to do. And, she's a cute kid. She's nice. And she plays good. We play a game called Bid Whist. And
what's that?
It's kind of like bridge, only you bid.
Okay.
You have to bid, and you can bid up or down. And she really, Thomas taught her bid whist so that when she comes to visit me, she can beat me. And she's actually very good. Yeah, because she'll bid a 5 no trump. And if you don't know the game, that won't make. But she will. I'll bid a 3 no trump, 5 no trump. You can't bid a 5 no trump. Well, Grandma Nick, you taught me the game, but I didn't. Thomas actually taught her. So it's being a grandmother is really different. It really is different. Yeah.
So I was talking to my aunt, and she just had her first grandchild by her youngest, and she said it felt like something left her. Did you feel the same way when your son had his child? This is your coffee. Sorry.
No, I think there's something added to the family because we were concerned because my mom died in June and my sister died in July, 3 weeks later, and then my Aunt Ann, who was the mother of Pat, who broke her shoulder, and Ann died in October, and so we just watched the family kind of dissolve. That's what I felt, and so I went from I'm the baby in the family, and I went from being the baby in the family to all of a sudden I was the elder.
Right. And
Pat called me, and I said, "Well, I don't know anything about that." She said, "Well, you're the elder," and I hadn't thought about being the elder. I said, "I'm a baby." She said, "No, you're the elder." Get with it. So that's what's been and you have a granddaughter, and soon Kai will be probably married with children or single with children, whichever way it goes, doesn't matter to me. And we'll look around, then I'll be a great grandmother. And how did that happen? Thomas is 53. Yeah. Which I called him on his birthday to wish him happy birthday, of course. I said, "Oh, how does it feel to be 50? He said, "Mom, I'm 53. And I said, "How did that happen?" I really did think he was 50, but he is 53. I went and looked it up. He's 53.
You weren't too far off. So we invited Nikki to be a part of the Y'all Don't Hear Me collection, and she agreed, so thank you again for that. But the collection is all about the 5 values of the Appalachia, not just within the Black culture, but the entire Appalachia as a region. And those values are family, spirituality, land, labor, and pride. And those morals just ring throughout the region, and they carry over generations. So you have this gallery, that gallery, and the gallery at Tipton. Tipton is past, this is the present, and that gallery represents the future. And that just reiterates how these values have been passed over generations. So out of those values, what do you connect with the most? From family, spirituality, land, labor,
I'm sure
pride?
kitchen.
Kitchen?
Oh yeah, food
Yeah.
is so important. You know, you really get to know food. You and a stranger can sit in a restaurant, and because I really happen to like pig feet, I really make incredibly good roasted pig feet. And you could be sitting there eating pig feet, and someone says, "Oh, you like pig feet?" And you know, next thing you know, you've got a conversation.
True.
And family is nice, but you can lose. As I said, you know, mine is when I'm gone, Thomas won't. He'll have his daughter, but well, that makes me sad. But the families, the Giovannis are going to go. My middle aunt married the Fords, and means nothing to you all, but the Fords are gone except for Pat.
Okay.
And my youngest aunt, who was Agnes, and we were very close, married the Chapmans, and my cousin Terry died, and that was all. There are no more Chapmans. So again, you have food and recipes, and I would encourage any of you who are writing or who are caring about writing anything, get those recipes from your grandmother, actually, because so many of you grew up, which God bless you, eating fast food. It's a wonder that you're still alive. It's bad for you, and it's ugly, and you know, you're in there and everybody's rushing you or something. And I think that that's important because that keeps us alive. That keeps the family going, and you remember, and then you share that with your friends or with your lovers or with your whatever. This is the way my grandmother made it, you know. And as I said, I think I'm a good Southern cook. I'm not a chef, but I'm a good Southern cook. And of course, Southern cooks, as we all know, cook out of the pantry.
Yeah.
So you start with what's in the refrigerator or what's around, and then what's in the pantry, and you throw in all of that together, and that's what the Southern cooks do.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's important, and you learn that from your grandparents. Yeah, and I think that's what's important.
Do you garden too? Do you garden?
Well, my garden didn't work this year, but I tried to. My okra, I got two pots for my okra. I think it's the groundhog. I only have 2 acres, so I don't have a lot of room, but things move in on you. And I think the groundhogs have been eating my okra, and I don't have any, but I keep my herbs on the deck. So basil, because basil smells so good, and rosemary, so I always have that, but I don't have a lot of them. My cilantro didn't do well this year either, so I can't really say that I did it.
You have it out there.
Yeah, I read something, and I forget what now. Most of my reading is nonfiction, and I read that if you put peanuts in your garden, you know, turn the soil over, the peanuts would revive the soil. And I think that's what I need to do, but I'm 79, and I'm not really capable of turning the soil over, just more than I can handle. And I have a dear friend whom I love so much who does he helps us a lot. I think he's the only Christian I really know that just comes to help 2 little old ladies. But he and his wife, unfortunately, both developed, or had, however you put that, COVID. So he can't come over, he can't come out.
Yeah.
And so nothing has been done, but eventually either somebody will need money or Ryan will feel better, and we'll get it all turned over. And I've got all these peanuts. I'm surprised that the groundhogs, the squirrels are smart. I'm surprised they haven't learned to lift up the top of the can and get the peanuts. I'm really surprised. That's the truth.
So, how were you introduced to writing? Let's go back.
Oh, like everybody else, you know, you heard stories, which actually came out of songs. You go to church, and you go to church on time. And that was, I really am sorry and that's one of the things that Thomas and I are arguing about. I'm really sorry that Queen Elizabeth is gone, because I think that she was an incredibly great leader. And to have been with the world for 70 years, it's going to be a really different world without her. I'm not against King Charles, but he's not his mother.
Yeah.
But I think that when you think about it, I mentioned this because Philip was late going to church. I'm a nonfiction, I'm a history major. And Philip was late going to church one day, and she just said, you know, church starts at 11. And he understood, you know.
Yeah.
And if you're not on time, I'm gonna have your head cut off. So he was never late again. And you grow up in church and you hear the stories in church and you hear the spirituals in church. Oh, yes, you can do that.
Yeah, he's been texting me, and I'm like, I'm trying to have a conversation.
Well, no, this is Starbucks. I don't care what you. Oh, thank you. Oh, I haven't had any coffee since I've been here, so.
Oh, that's the chai.
Sorry, this
I get
is
the little
yours.
one. Okay.
That'll be mine.
And that'll be, you get the.
Sorry, I didn't realize
Oh,
mine
thank
would
you.
be bigger.
Oh, yeah, you have to have. You have to have your Starbucks. But, excuse me, but you do. I mean, I do, you know. But one of the things, you know, you go to church, and you go to church, as I say, on time. And, of course, you go to Sunday school. And so that you start with that. You go to Sunday school on time. You hear the stories in Sunday school. And then there was a drugstore in Carter Roberts, and you had enough. Now, we were not as poor as a lot of people wish we were, but we were not rich. You know, grandmother gave you a quarter. And so you could go and you'd have to put a dime in Sunday school. Then you had a nickel for ice cream. That's when ice cream was a nickel. Then you had to put a dime in church, you know. And so we'd all go down, the kids would all go down, we have an ice cream, and you had to be back at 11 in your seat. But then you also were hearing those stories, the biblical stories. I love the music, and I just did a CD with Javon Jackson, who you are too young to know, but maybe someone in this room is a jazz fan. Javon was the youngest saxophone player with Art Blakey. And when Mr. Blakey died, Javon accepted a job at the University of Hartford, and he runs the jazz festival. But I met Javon, and we were just talking. I was up there, and we were both talking. I said, "Oh, I really love spirituals," and he said, "So do I." I said, "Oh, you know, it's great," and he said, "Oh, we ought to do something together." And it was one of those, you know, and people say that to you all the time, and I said, "Oh, you know, yeah." I said, "You know, email. I don't email," and I said, "You know, email my secretary. She'll take care of it." I didn't expect him to, but he did. And he said, you know, he'd like to work with me. And I had Jenny write him back and say, you know, we would. I didn't name the album, but the CD, it's called the Gospel According to Nikki Giovanni. And what I did was I picked the spirituals. And there's a story behind all of the spirituals. And so if you say, how did I learn? But there's a story behind almost everything if you if you give it some thought. And of course, one of my grandmother's favorite was church open. We're Baptists, and the church opened with leaning on the everlasting arms. And it always fascinated me that everlasting, that's a hell of a thing, that leaning on the everlasting. And it's always stayed, it still stays with me, on the everlasting arms. I think that's an incredible. That gets you through 200 years. And that's just a song I love. But my grandmother's favorite song, which we sang at her funeral, was "It Is Well With My Soul." And again, it's, you know, you're starting to listen to what are these people saying and who are they saying it to. And of course, you know, you can read. I mean, I could always read. I don't know when I learned to read, but you always had books. And my mother had some dirty books, but she always kept the dirty books in her closet. And I think she didn't know that we knew. And I say we, I don't think my sister did, but I knew that she had dirty books in the closet. So when she was at work, because she finally took a job, and when she was at work, I could go and get the little dirty romance books, and then I'd read it, and I knew when she came home, so I could put them back. She probably knew that I was reading them because Mommy and I are very much alike, and said, I know where everything is you know, right now I could, in my home, I know if someone has been in,
Yeah.
I know, because I left everything. It's just what I what I do. It's why I don't like in a hotel, and it makes everybody crazy if they have to stay. When Garrett, my sister, was around, it made her crazy because she always wanted the hotel maid to come in, and I didn't.
Yeah.
I said, you know, no. I lay my whatever I've got, my toothbrush, I lay everything out. I don't want it touched, and then I don't have to be awake
Right.
when I leave it, because I've made most of my living being on the road until I took the job at Virginia Tech, and that was an amazing thing because I'd never had a job, and I was recruited to Virginia Tech, and I asked Mommy. I was living with Mommy. My father had died, and I was living with Mommy because I knew she called me when I called him Gus. That was his name, but I didn't like him, and he was not a nice person in my opinion. But she called me and said, you know, your father is in the hospital. He had a stroke, and I knew she didn't call to tell me because I didn't care. So I knew if she called, it's because she needed somebody. And so Thomas was born, and I had a dog. I've always had a dog, and the dog was Duke. So Duke and Thomas and I packed up the little Volkswagen I had. We went home, and so being there, I now had this offer from Virginia Tech, and I said, you know, what do you think you want to move to Virginia? And she said, you know, essentially Quo Vadis. She said, I'll go wherever you go. And so we moved to Virginia. And she and I were talking. Mommy drank beer. I cook with it, but I don't drink it. And we were sitting there one evening, and she said, you know, I've never had my own home. And I thought, well, yeah, she said, you know, I've lived in my father's home. His name John Brown. I love Grandpapa so much. And she said, and I've lived in your father's home, but I've never had my own. And I thought, oh, we're going to solve that. And I went to the bank and got a mortgage and bought our home.
There you go.
And so I could move out, which was good because I want my home. But see, we were very much alike.
Right.
But when Mommy got her own home, now she's got her home, so she's not living with her husband or her father. My Aunt Ann, who is going to die eventually, but not right now, she said, well, I want to be where you all are. And we said, come down. She said, but I want my own home. I want my home. So we got right across the street from Mommy and bought a home. So she had her own. But then my baby aunt said, how come everybody's in Knoxville? I mean, in
Virginia.
in Blacksburg, and I'm not. And come on down. But her husband was alive. So Uncle Clinton came. He's a nice guy. He barbecued for us all the time. And the three of them, and they moved, and they had their own home. It was really, you know. So all of a sudden, I had moved all the family down. But what I didn't know about jobs, I was a performer. And when you're doing what I'm doing, you get paid. I'm not as bad as Aretha. If you know anything about our soror, Aretha was our soror. But Aretha counted her money in cash.
Yeah, always cash.
Oh my.
In a purse.
And she's not walking out on stage. But I'm not like that. You know, you can send me a check. I'm cool. But it was really funny. So I got my first paycheck. I got my first paycheck. And I said, that's fine. And I have an account. There's only three of us in my business. And so I sent it to Barb, who's my accountant. And then in the middle of the month, I got another paycheck. So I went to Jenny, who had recruited me, and I said, you know, there's some mistake. I got a check at the beginning of the month, and they're giving, someone has accidentally sent me another. Do I send it back, or do I? She said, no, you get paid. It's twice a month. I said, if I had known that, I would have taken a job. I didn't know you got paid twice a month.
Yeah.
And it was so funny. So now I'm used to it. But you know, I didn't live that kind of life. And it's funny when you have a job. That's one of the nicest things about a job. You do get paid twice a month.
Yep.
And then you get a card that says, you know, Medicare, what is it, Anthem. And so if you hurt yourself, you pull the card out. And the people say, oh yeah, you know, sign here, and it goes someplace else, and they don't send you a bill. So I'll be there. Who ever heard of that? So I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So
And
now that you're retired, what are you gonna do with your free time?
I don't have any free time right now. I don't know when it's coming up, but I was born in the old Knoxville colored hospital, which no longer exists. And my grandparents, my family at that point lived with, my mother and father and sister lived with my grandparents. And that was on Mulvaney Street. And they got to move, Gus got a job in Cincinnati, which is why we moved to Cincinnati.
Right.
They were waiting for Mommy to birth me. And then we went to Cincinnati. And Mulvaney Street runs, well, I should go this way, from Vine Street all the way down. And UT wanted, it took them some time, but the University of Tennessee wanted that area. And they took it. And so they named it after Pat Summitt. So now, if you're going there, it's called Summit Hill Drive, right? And that would be a long story that'll make me sad, but I am working on a book. I am working on a book about my childhood. And the one thing that the book is entitled A Street Called Mulvaney. And I just didn't want it to be forgotten. And that's where black people live. And across the street over here is Cal Johnson Park. And Dr. Johnson was, I think, an incredibly brilliant man. I, of course, did not know him. But he had deeded the land from the creek to Mulvaney, and he deeded it to the state in a way that they can't do anything with it. So Cal Johnson Park for black children is still there, will always be there, though now Mulvaney Street isn't. And the first, and I don't even want to call it chapter, but I'm doing a series of short stories. And the first short story is a library, because if you go from our house, we're at 400 Mulvaney, go up to Vine Street in the corner there, it's a Carnegie library. And you know, Andrew Carnegie built these libraries for black kids. And so you go up there. And so my book will debut on the 27th.
Nice.
And it's called, it's a library. But I got to meet Dr. Carla Hayden, who was the first black librarian for the Library of Congress, which you may or may not know. She's wonderful. Dr. Hayden's a wonderful woman. And she saw the book. We were exchanging some letters, and I sent her a copy, or I sent her just I Xeroxed it because the book wasn't out yet. And she said, oh, I'd love to debut it at the Library of Congress. And you got to be kidding. Yes. If I have to swim over there, walk over there, ride my bike over there, you bet I'll be there.
Yeah.
So on the 27th, we are debuting a library at that. And then I have some more, you know, I'll continue to write.
Well, congratulations
Well,
on
thank
that.
you.
Yeah. So going back to the 60s and 70s, that was when the Black Power movement was happening, but also when the Black Arts movement was happening. What was that creative community like from your perspective?
I think we can go back to that, or we can step back a smidgen and go back into the Harlem Renaissance.
Let's do it.
And you've got County Cullen, you've got Langston Hughes. I did not get to know Mr. Hughes or Mr. Cullen. They were gone before I came along, but I did get to know James Baldwin. And I worked with Ellis Hazlip, and that's a with, not for. And I would say that to any of you who are working, you have to be careful who you work for. You can work with a lot of people, but just be very careful. Because if they start paying you, they think they own you.
Right.
And they think they can tell you what to do. And Ellis Hazlip, who was the producer, didn't think he owned me, but he did a show called Soul. And they're just beginning to recognize Soul really was a black, if I may, Ed Sullivan. Because it had a variety of people on, you know, just a really great show. And working with Ellis on that, at the end of the year, he owed me, because I had every week I had done something. And he said, well, what would you like? And everybody knows I'm a foodie. I said that. And he was thinking, well, he'll take me to one of the great, you know, New York has great French restaurants. And I said, well, I'd love to meet James Baldwin. And he said, well, I know Jimmy. And I was like, what? He said, I'll call him and see, you know, if he has time. I was like, whoa. And he did, and a couple of days later he came back and said, Jimmy would love to meet you, but he doesn't have time to come to the United States, and he wanted to know if you would mind meeting him in London. And again, this one, I will swim to London, of course. And I had a wonderful young lady at that point working with me. Well, she worked for me, Debbie Russell, and she died of cancer. It's very sad to me. But Debbie and Thomas and I went to London, and it was great. And it was that show is, what is this thing you all call it? Facebook. That show is on. I mean, you can see it any place because it's fine with me. But I was so glad that it was filmed in London because the British film differently from the Americans. And both Jimmy and I talk with our hands. And at that time, both of us smoked. And so you will see that nothing we could do about that. It's a bad idea, don't smoke. But we did. I thought it was a wonderful show. Yeah. So, you know, you asked what will I do? Well, there's some things that I want to get done like that. Working with Giovanni. I'm 20 years younger than Jimmy, and I'm 20 years older than Giovanni. So I think I'm really lucky to be continuing that, for lack of a better word, that duty. Yeah. And working with Giovanni has been great. Yeah. It's been fun. So, you know, you just keep your eyes open and see what's available. But that's not exactly, you asked how was the Black Arts Movement. But it was all a part of doing, I think that any artist does what the artist does. And I think if we talk to any of them, as I said, I certainly didn't know the Harlem Renaissance, and I certainly did not really get to know, I knew all of my contemporaries because you just know each other. But I think that the main thing is you should do your work, and that which works for you works. And other people will say they don't like it or they disagree. I didn't, and I still don't. I don't have disagreements with my contemporaries who don't like what I'm doing. You know, why are you writing children's stories? Because I can, and thank you for your opinion. I didn't ask. I hate an opinion. It's another reason I got along with my mother. I didn't want her opinion, and she never gave it, and she didn't want my opinion, and I never gave it. And that's why we could always love each other, because we didn't meddle in each other's business. Yeah. And I think, you know, you have to be careful about who you let convince you. And when we look at my generation, quite a few have done way better, if I may put it that way, financially than somebody like me. Because I had no interest in writing a movie. I just didn't have any interest in a lot of those things that people did. I don't want to be on the cover of Vogue magazine. I certainly would have turned down, though I was not asked. Whatever she did, the young woman now did that thing, Gorman, at the NFL. Is that her name, Gorman? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wait, what did she do?
She was there at the NFL doing something. I thought, my God. But
I know she was there at the inauguration, but I didn't know she did something at the football game.
Yeah. At halftime. And I thought, that's insane. But it's her work. I mean, and I'm just talking, you asked, but I think you always have to do what it is that makes you happy, so I'm happy for her. I'm a big fan of Venus and Serena, and I really, really love the way that Venus Williams has conducted her life. And I'm happy for Serena because she seems, you know, I've only met them. They're not friends, you know. Yeah. I'm way too old to be hanging out with them. But it's just, you have to do what's important to you.
Yeah. Speaking of the generation, so there is like this kind of like disconnect between the older and the younger generation. I don't know if it's because social media or just a lack of communication between the two generations, but there seems to be like, just in different conversations, a lot of older people complaining about the behavior of the younger generation. What are we doing that makes you proud? But then what are some things that we could do better? And I know this is kind of like an opinionated question, as you just said. You don't give opinions.
I'm really, I think that what me and Nikki have done that helped your generation is that I published my first 2 books. And so now we see a lot of young people publishing their own books. And I'm happy about that because I think that I kind of helped you all see that you don't need a lot of people that you think you need. I'm very proud, especially of Black Lives Matter, because that's a global. We were civil rights in the United States. We did civil rights, but Black Lives Matter is global. And I think that that's incredibly good. Those 3 women that began that, I just think I'm so proud of them. And I think what you do is what's important to you. Yeah. And you have to remember that Roy Wilkins did not think that Martin Luther King was right, and he complained about that. You know, Frederick Douglass complained about the NAACP. I mean, all of the old people complain about what the younger generation is doing. I don't think it's any of our business. I have a fish pond, and I go out on the pretty days like it is today with a glass of champagne, and I sit and I watch my fish. I do. They're really nice. They just swim around, and we all like each other. Because you don't need I'm not a leader. And I think that, if I may say it this way, I think one of the mistakes that a great man, Martin Luther King Jr., made was not recognizing I've done all that I can do. And so things happened that happened. But I was a classmate of John Lewis. John and I were fish guides, And actually, John came back to school as I went back. It's a longer story. But we were actually holding hands walking down to get our diplomas. And I think that John recognized, you know, I've taken my last hit in the head. And he ran for representative. And of course, I think that he did more as he became a part of a bigger body. And I'm not saying than Martin, because I'm not picking on Martin like that. But at some point, you have to recognize they don't need you. You all don't need us. So if you were coming over to Virginia and you were sitting at my house, we would have a drink, because I think drinking is a really good idea. You get to be my age. If you don't drink now, when you plan to. That's the truth. And we would talk, but I don't have any advice, because you know what you want to do and you know what you can do. And I don't think your generation is cowardly. And I'm very proud of the white women who are fighting for abortion, because it's their lives. And one of the things we know is that if you can't control your body, you're nothing but a slave. So we were black slaves, but they're going to be white slaves, and they've recognized that. And so, and I'm not trying to convince anybody to do anything, because it's your body. Nobody's going to make you have an abortion. But if you want to deal with your body, you should. That I do know. And I vote, of course, because I did have the extreme pleasure, but again, we didn't hang out, of knowing Fannie Lou Hamer, who I think is one of the great women of America. And I've always said, and I said it to my son, I'm pointing because we're looking at but I always said to Thomas, as far as I know biologically, and some of you may be biological, but I think the last thing that dies on the human body is the liver. I think everything else, the last thing that dies is the liver. And I've said to Thomas, when I die, if it's a time to vote, and you can just take my liver and take it and let it vote. Because, because Fannie Lou Hamer was beaten and beaten and beaten for blacks to have a vote. And so as long as there's anything alive in me, I'm going to vote. And I think I owe that to Miss Hamer. I met her. I think that she's great. Yeah, I do. Thank you. And I think that these are things we have to think of. We have a voice. And I'm just a poet, so all I have are words. And I have to use them. That is my responsibility. I hate the silence. I hate sometimes your generation knows better and you don't say anything. And I think that that's a shame, because all you have too, if you don't have anything else, you have words, and you have to use them.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions from y'all before I keep going? Yeah?
did you start with poetry?
How did you start with poetry?
I think it was just reading children's books, to tell you the truth, because they too are short. I don't really know, but I found myself writing poetry, and I mentioned earlier, my parents had, in my mind, what was a troubled marriage. It wasn't a troubled marriage to my mother or to my father. So again, you start to write, and so I wrote a poem called Nikki Rosa, and I realized that there were people that were trying to determine what my life was, and that I had to make a decision. Was I going to be happy or unhappy? And the poem is going to come out of that. And that's where the poem was. And of course, I was very lucky to have my grandmother, an incredible, I love grandpapa, but grandmother is my heart, always is. And I still always, I think about grandmother pretty much all the time. If there's any one person, that you want to make happy, for me, it's your grandmother. And I have my students, when I was teaching, we always talked about Little Red Riding Hood, because where did her mother send her to save her? Send her to a grandmother. And that was not, Little Red Riding Hood wasn't a fool. And her grandmother her mother gave her the last of the bread and the last of the meat, the dried meat, which Little Red Riding Hood is as you know, a European, it's Eastern European. And she told her, go to your grandmother. Now we know that people were jealous, ultimately, of the grandmothers who were taking care of the grandchildren, and they called them witches. And we know that they ended up going in and killing the witches, didn't they? So there's a story there, because you say, well, why did they go in and burn these people? Why were they upset? And they were upset because they're pedophiles and fools. And these are things we know, but we also know that Snow White, where does she have to go? Well, she was lucky she got the 7 dwarfs. And what were they doing? They were digging coal. So what do we know about the 7 dwarfs? We know that they are all going to die of lung cancer, because that's what they were doing. They were in the mine, but in the meantime, they were protecting this girl, right, who needed, and she did her fair share. She kept the house clean and she cooked, but they went out, hi-ho, if off to work we go. And so as you were hearing these stories, to me, I try to make sense of what really happened there. And we know Rapunzel let down your hair, it's just about sex. So we know that think about it.
I didn't know what they were going to do when he got up. I just, never really thought
Think about
that
look
much.
at your hair. If I was your mother in 1500, I might put you in a tower too, because somebody would want you or want to use you. And somebody else would be saying, well, let down your hair, I just want to talk to you. And I have to teach you to protect yourself. So I love the fairy tales and I love the spirituals. And when you put them together, you begin to see how these two groups of people who could not read or write could tell their sons and daughters, but mostly their daughters, how to protect themselves. And we know that they gave up everything that they have to protect their daughters. But we know that there was also an ongoing unnice thing that happened with the men and the women. And the men kept thinking they need to destroy the women, they need to control the women. And all of that needs to stop. Here we are in 2022 having the same discussion as Rapunzel had. It needs to stop. Men need to grow up, in my opinion. I have a son, I like it. But
I want to ask, because one of the poems in your 30-year collection,
oh my goodness, look at that.
One of them talks about Black love. Poem for Dudley Randall. And I can.
Dudley is going to be in Detroit.
Okay.
And he did, Dudley had Broadside Press. Okay. And I think it's fair to share because they're both gone. Dudley and Gwen Brooks.
Gotcha.
Had a mad affair. And it was just the funniest thing, because everybody's like, oh no. And Gwen ended up giving her poems, to Broadside Press, which was not a good business idea. And I said that to Gwen, this is a bad business idea. It has nothing to do with anything else. And Gwen and I didn't fall out.
Yeah.
But it was good advice, but you don't always listen. So I met this man who was a publisher when he was young, who was a poet now, gentle and loving and very patient with a revolutionary black woman who drags him to meetings, but never quite gets around to saying, I love you. And I loved Dudley. I mean, he was a good friend. But in terms of business, I'm not going to publish with Broadside. And we made a deal, my second book, we made a deal that since I was publishing my books, could I use Broadside? And I could give him the 10%, but I couldn't do business with him. And I'm not that good a businesswoman, but my grandmother was, and so I learned, you know, you can do business with a lot of people, you can like them and admire them, but business is business. And a lot of people don't realize that, you know. And as I say, I'm a poet, so I know I'll never be rich because poets aren't rich. And you don't have to be, but you have to take care of your money, if I may, so that you can take care of your art.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's good advice for any of you who write poetry. You are never going to be rich, so you don't have to worry about it. It's just not. But if you're enjoying writing, you may end up writing. And I say this to my students too. You may end up writing. You can write poetry. You can write other things. And I know I look at Jeopardy. I love Jeopardy. And you look at most of the questions of Jeopardy. Most of them are literary. When you look at it, most of them are, you know, what's the third chapter in, you know, Shakespeare's Hamlet or something. And you all know because you read. And the people on Jeopardy don't. You can always tell. And you can. And I love it when they miss the black question. You know, they missed Tony Mars the other day, you know. And I was a wrong answer once on Jeopardy. So, yeah.
Wow.
I was so pleased. I told my class, I was a wrong answer. But, you know, there are other things you can do, but you have to know the difference between your business and your art.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you're going to be unhappy. But I would say that if you all were athletes, I would say that to you. If you ask, because I don't do advice, but I've taught a couple of Virginia Tech athletes, and I tried to say that as a friend, you need to separate your athleticism, what you can do, with your business. You need to find someone that you trust. And my lawyer and I have been together for 50 years. And I don't know what I'll do. I just retired. And Gloria's thinking about retiring. I said, well, when you retire, I don't know, because that's who I trust. And you have to find somebody you trust, because your best friend is not a good idea for your business. I don't know how to tell you that. But since I don't give advice, I won't, but that's something you might think about. Your best friend is just not a good idea.
Something I was curious about with the climate that we're in right now, just in 2022, we just got a lot coming at us, from the war to still dealing with social justice to COVID. How do you cope with environments like this? How do you protect your mental and your spiritual and just really get through hard times?
You know what I don't understand? Thank you for asking. I don't understand why your generation is bitching. This is not the work. I mean, we can go back to scarlet fever, we can go, which wiped out a third of the planet.
Yeah.
We can go back to slavery, which is not something that white people invented. It was a dual thing. Europeans went to Africa, and Africa sold some of us. I mean, I don't know what the problem is. Oh, well, it's not fair. When have we not had this? You know, you want to talk about wars? Look at Hannibal, and God bless Hannibal, who the Romans thought that they were okay because nobody could get over the Alps. And Hannibal took his elephants and walked over, then he kicked Romans behind. So we've had wars. When have we not? And I'm not saying it's all a good idea. I'm just saying this is not something incredibly unusual. The thing that bothers me probably the most, and I can do nothing about that, is the weather. And I think that we have just pushed Mother Nature way further than Mother Nature wants to be pushed. You can't not keep putting dams up and not expect it to show up someplace else. So if you're looking at the Hoover Dam, you're looking at dams, you're looking at we have messed with the one thing that we need, which is water. And we have bothered it to the point that it is now responding to us. So the ocean is. But if you look at us, and anybody can, you just look at we are not Earth. We should be called something like hydro. Most of us is not land, it's water. And we need to respect that, because that's the one thing you cannot live without.
Right.
You can go a long time without food, but you have about 4 days to go without water, and you're gone. You're absolutely out of here. And these are things that we know. But speaking of what I work with, if I may share, because I love so much, I love space. And I've been working with NASA.
Nice.
And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. You never know why people do. I wrote a poem called Quilting the Black Eyed Pea, We're Going to Mars. And they read it, and it's one of those things they call. So now, as you know, today is the 23rd, 22nd?
20th.
Okay, so we got 4 more days. There is a meteor coming close to Earth. Some of you probably know that. And it's if we don't do something in our minds, it's going to hit us. And we're afraid. Earth is afraid, because we're always afraid. Human beings are the scariest people. I don't know what's wrong with it. But there's a fear that it will hit Earth, and it will really destroy something. And so Dr. Robertson called me, and he said, we're going to try to launch a rocket against it. Now, we can't do anything with the meteor. We know that. It's too big, and there's nothing we can do. What we're trying to do is push it. We just want to push it just a couple of feet, really, just like a New York driver. We just want to hit it and and push it. That's all. And then it'll go, and it'll be another couple of thousand years in the galaxy before it comes back around. And so I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, we thought, you'd write a poem, and we'd have and there'd be a celebration. We would all get together. We're going to send this rocket, and when we do, we'll read your poem. And I said, well, I think you got the wrong girl, because I'm cheering for the meteor. I think it ought to hit us, because I think we're a waste of everybody's time and energy. And he said, oh, Nick, you can't think like that. I said, yeah, I can. But I gave it a lot of thought, and I finally sent it in. Now, I don't know. I gave it to them. I don't work for NASA. I work with them. I gave it to them. And I don't mind if you'll let me share.
Yeah, I was going to ask,
What I am pointing out is that we think every living thing looks like us, and it's not true. There are life forms that are in different shapes and just very different. And my poem says that there's a meteor, but it's mating time in the galaxy. And the meteorite has looked, and it sees us because we are the blue planet, third planet from the yellow sun. We are the blue planet, and actually we're quite pretty, if you've seen. And so the meteorite is saying, oh, I think I'll go mate with the third planet from the yellow sun, right? Only we don't want to do that. So instead of trying to kill it or something, what we have to do is say we're sorry. We are spoken for. We have already given our word. We are belonging to someone else. Come back tomorrow night, as the old blues song says, and try it again. So I don't know what they're going to do, but I'm just saying, what if there's a life form that's in love with the planet, that just wants to mate, that just wants to be a part of it? So it's driving them crazy, because I'm on the side of the but I can see that we don't know life,
right?
Because we don't know it here on Earth. And so if we don't begin to get used to life in another, but that's what I think. And I think we'll push it away. I think that instead of trying to hurt it, that we need to communicate with it, that we're sorry, we're spoken for. So we can't make this year with you.
Yeah.
So we'll see you later. I don't know what they're gonna do. We're sitting. I'm gonna go down, and they're gonna, they're gonna. It's gonna. The rocket is gonna go, and so we'll be sitting there. And I suggested, because I suggested for everything, that we have some good champagne. Well, if it's gonna hit us,
Yeah.
you gotta go down.
And this is supposed to be the 24th.
It is. I mean, that's what, according to NASA, that's it's going to supposed to hit on the 24th. But we'll push it away. But I think that pushing it away is the same thing as, why not just say no? Why not assume that this is not some rock that we should destroy, but a life form that we can get to know, and just admit, just tell them, well, we're really sorry, but we're already spoken for. See what happens. Because only one or two things can happen.
Right.
They can say, oh, I'm sorry, because I really liked you, I take good care of you, or, the hell with you. So it all depends on what gets said. Yeah, I think it's exciting.
Okay.
Can't be scared of everything.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I think it's just, like you said, humans were always afraid of something. And with all the negative news coming at us, it's just like, what is going on? I can't take it anymore.
Yeah, but we've had, again,
It's been
there's
worse.
just nothing happening now that hasn't happened.
Right.
And of course, I would be delighted without having a fight with anyone. Obviously, Mr. Trump needs to be arrested as a traitor, because there's no reason that he had those papers other than to sell them. So that'd be another discussion. I don't wish to particularly have it. They'll figure it out. But I just think we have to look at things differently, and we have to stop always trying to get something more, and figure out how do we live with what we have, how to be happy.
Right.
And I feel sorry for the kid. I feel sorry for the kids, for the youngsters, because I think Facebook has not been good. I don't do any of that. I don't email or twit or Facebook or any. I don't do any of that. But I think that it has been harmful, because then people are comparing themselves to somebody who's lying to them.
Right.
and somebody is, oh, I had such a good time last night. Well, then how do you have time to write me? I mean, don't hand me that crap, know. And, oh, I'm really pretty. Well, when did that happen? I mean, you can't, you just can't let these strangers into your life. And I think that everybody has somebody to love and who would love them. And I think that you have to leave yourself open to what you're looking for. And you have to be willing to give what you're looking for.
Right.
That'll keep you happier, that'll keep you saner. Or if you had a fool like me for your teacher, you'd be looking at rocks trying to talk to them. And it won't hurt.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it.
You don't know, you never know. There's a woman in Prairie View, A&M College, right outside of Houston, and her name is Dr. Simmons. She's great, really a great woman. And Dr. Simmons has taught her students, she's the president of A&M, she just retired too, has taught her students at A&M not to walk on the grass. And she says to them, and now you go to A&M, nobody walks on the grass. And she said, don't walk on the grass because you don't know who's buried underneath. And she's got everybody, if you're at A&M, you don't walk on the grass. You just don't, because you don't know.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, her name is Ruth. I know her as Ruth. I said, Ruth, that is so beautiful. She said, well, it gives them something to think about, because we don't know who's beneath our feet.
That's true.
I
Very
just think
true.
it's she's a Delta. I think it's wonderful, and I think that's a good lesson. And watching Ukraine, and we're watching, which is very sad, of course, and watching them now digging up the bodies.
Yeah.
Well, you don't. Grass will grow. No question. I don't know when. I may not be here, but grass will grow. And the people who are there will have to make a decision. how do I walk?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they cannot walk on the grass because there's always a body that's been missed. And you don't want to step on it.
Right.
You don't want to do that. You want to honor the dead.
Yeah.
So I just think, and again, you say, well, how do we, there's a lot to, it's not that different, but there's a lot to look at.
Right.
I really think life is a good idea, and I certainly recommend it. And I think we have to think about where we came from and hopefully where we're going.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. I think life is interesting. I had a bet that I lost because I had bet a friend of mine that Queen Elizabeth was never going to die. Well, she kept living and living. And you can see Charles woke up every morning, how's Mom? But I think that, we have to continue. And I think a lot of people, I like history, but I think a lot of people and I'm not complaining about your generation, but you just don't know the word duty. And you just don't have a sense of the joy that duty brings, that you've done your duty. And that's a very pleasurable.
Yeah.
When you go home at night and drink whatever you drink, Mommy drank beer, but when you go home and say, I did my duty today, then what more can you ask of yourself?
Yeah.
And you have a right to be satisfied with yourself. And that's where you write. That's what brings your story out, I think.
Jesse, I feel like you have a question.
I don't know how we could end it any better than that moment right there. But,
Okay.
we do have a couple minutes. Do any of you all have questions that you would like to? Yes.
Do you have a favorite poem, just in general, by anybody?
Not really, or probably I do, but I have enough sense not to say it. Because, that's what happens. And again, I was talking about our soror, Aretha. You can't answer that question. It's not a bad question. But if you answer it, then somebody else says, but I like. And then you find yourself arguing against your own, but that's not my best poem. Now look at what I did. Look at them, So I think that what I have allowed to be published, and I enjoyed, it's like, I really enjoy the media. I just right now, that's the last poem that I wrote, I just really get a kick out of it. People thinking, well, finally, maybe it's not what I think it is. So I just get a big kick out of doing that. But I've written a lot of love poems because, most poets, I'm always in love with something or someone. I haven't written any poems to my dog, but that's about though she's so good, I have a little Yorkie. And I almost brought her down here because I see everybody with their dogs. And
We brought ours. You should have brought yours.
She's really yappy. That's the trouble. Which I say to her, well, anybody has a Yorkie, they are the yappiest dogs in the world. But I keep saying to her, if you would have some sense, you could travel. We could go places. But, I guess I like the last poem that I wrote. And, you keep trying and you keep making, some I know are better than others. I'm not an idiot. I'm not a fool. I know that some poems are just better poems than others. But I've enjoyed sharing ideas that maybe most people don't think about. So if you can put another idea out there, maybe one of you children, one of you youngsters, you're not children. Well, when you're 79, you're close to it. But one of you youngsters say, oh, yeah, and you'll pick up that idea and take it someplace else. And I thought that I taught for 35 years, and all I wanted my students to do, really, was to find another idea. They weren't there to please me. They were there to reckon with themselves, to bring something else out, to take a chance. And I think that writing, like jazz, I love jazz for just that reason. When jazz is, you've got a trio or a quartet, because if you get an orchestra, it's written down, but you get that trio, that quartet, and they all seem to know when to go in, and and I just think that's great because you could make a mistake. You could come in too early or too late or something, but you take a chance because you're making music. And I feel the same way about poetry. You take a chance because you're making poetry. Somebody doesn't like it. Thelonious Monk, who is one of my favorites, and I don't know if anybody's into jazz, but Thelonious is a great pianist. And he was being interviewed. You know, he wasn't a grump, but he wasn't.
People's person.
He wasn't, yeah. And he was being interviewed, and somebody said, well, you know, Mr. Monk, you know, you play these wrong notes all the time. And Thelonious, you know, he always had his head down. You seldom see him with his head up. And he just looked up, and he said, piano ain't got no wrong notes. And I love it. And I said to my students, and I say to my students, poetry doesn't have any wrong words. You just don't have them in the right place. So as you are writing your poems, one of the things you think, oh, this isn't quite working, look at it again. You've got it, but maybe this should be on another line, or maybe we should move this around just a little bit, because words are not wrong. They just haven't found their place, and that's what you're looking for. It's the place to put it.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you.
If your heart was a nightclub and we all walked into it, what would be the first song that played?
Save Your Love for Me. I love it, I really do. And there's a singer now, of course that was Nancy Wilson, who was from Ohio. So Ohio's got a lot. But there's a girl a woman that I just discovered, actually. Her name is Jane Monique. And she does an incredible Save Your Love for Me. But of course, Etta James, you know, and so, you know, it's just a lovely, I mean, I like that, you know, and you know, they will or won't, but I just, you know, I could listen to it probably indefinitely. John Coltrane does a great job. I mean, it's a great song. I love it. Because that's the way you feel, you know, when you're in love. And then when you're out of love, you like go away. But yeah, that's what I would like to hear, you know.
Do you sing? Do you sing?
I got to sing. Don't laugh. As Giovanni and I are working on this CD, I was a close friend of Nina Simone. And Nina was a great old gal. That was a great loss. I'm not against suicide because it's your life, you have a right to do it, but I really was incredibly sorry to lose Nina. But one of her favorite songs was Night Song, which is from Golden Boy. And I said to and it's not really a spiritual or a gospel, but I said to Giovanni, I would like to sing, you know, Night Song. And he said, yeah, you know, sing it. So I do. So on the CD, I'm the third.
Nice.
I get to sing Night Song.
Hey.
And I know Nina's sitting in heaven laughing her ass off. But Night Song is a great song because the last line in Night Song, and I think that's what always had her attention, was where do music, such a lovely song, where do I belong? And I think that Nina was always looking for that.
Yeah.
Where do I belong? And I just wanted to give a shout out to Nina. So
Yeah.
I don't really sing, but well, it's my CD and I'm old, so
Why not?
I get to do what I want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesse, did you have another question?
Any other questions from the audience? I'm delighted with your questions.
I just want to say I appreciate not just in your work, but you as a human being, how honest you are. It's just really comforting.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, it's fun, and I look forward to it. We have a lot in Tennessee that hasn't been talked about. And as I said, I'm a history person, but I think, especially the Appalachians, I think that we in Appalachia more and more need to talk about what we're interested in, just our own lives, our own. Ron Rash, who I think is a brilliant writer, and I hope that you know Ron. And Ron writes about Appalachia, and I just think that this part of the country, because we'd be so different if Appalachia had not stood up, we'd be so different. If West Virginia had not become Conaway, which they took West Virginia's name away from West Virginia because it was going to be Kanawha. Like they took Tennessee's name away from, because we were going to be state of Franklin. And I don't have to tell you all that because you know that. But you talk to your grandparents. I was talking about food earlier. Get those recipes. Don't let it be lost because somebody says, oh, they're just a bunch of hillbillies. They're just a bunch of fools if they don't appreciate who you are. But you have to appreciate who you are. And that's the main thing. I reject Snuffy Smith because it's racist. And it is, if you look at Snuffy Smith. Snuffy's always stealing chickens. Louise is fat. You know, Jughead is stupid. And the sheriff was always, it's racist. And it shouldn't, it's not a comic. It's not funny. And we have stories to tell that are not about running around stealing chickens. We have some wonderful stories to tell about sitting on the front porch, because we all grew up, and I would bet you most of us grew up with front porches. And the front porch is so important because that's where you got to see people. Afternoon professor, my grandfather taught, so it'd be afternoon professor, they call him professor. Afternoon professor, and he would say afternoon, they knew everybody. And I hope that you all don't let that get lost, you know, because it's a wonderful story.
Yeah, we're trying.
Kren, you should invite them for tonight's poetry reading.
Yes, so as Jesse mentioned earlier, tonight Nikki will be doing a poetry reading and Q&A session. Not me, just her this time. And you're all invited. It'll be right across the street here at Brown Hall at 6 p.m. If you have any books of hers, are you willing to sign?
Oh, sure.
Okay, she's willing to sign. Pictures, I'm sure, okay too. Maybe. Pictures.
Oh, yeah, everybody, I mean.
We'll do a quick picture because I would like you to rest a little bit before the 6 o'clock. So, yes, take advantage while she's here.
Yeah.
'Cause earlier, there's going to be hundreds of people.
Yeah. So,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll see y'all
that's
tonight.
my pleasure.